I'm Brian V, and this is Why We Work. Today, I have the great pleasure of speaking with Caroline Ceniza-Levine. Caroline is an author, Forbes career contributor, as well as a career coach. I want to find out from Caroline where we should put our hope. And I mean, in the sense of in careers. Should our hope be in the markets that say that the job market is this or that, or unemployment is high or low? Or should we have more responsibility and take it upon ourselves? And while I believe she's going to go with the former, I want to find out how and work that out with her. So join me in my conversation with Caroline Ceniza-Levine. I'm Brian V, and this is Why We Work. Today, I have the great pleasure of speaking with Caroline Ceniza-Levine. Good evening, young lady.
Yes, thanks for having me on the show.
Well, I really appreciate. I find that I'm in over my head with most of my guests, but looking at your somewhat resume, things that you've been doing, noticing the footprint that you have on social media, having a lot of experience with interviews and just your career, I usually feel I'm really feeling over my head here. So if you would do me the pleasure of just a little snapshot of who you are, and then I'd like to bring
Hmm.
you back, but I certainly feel like I'm drowning on my end.
No, I don't know why you feel that way. My career, very simply, is all about careers. My first job, even in college, was working at the career office of my college. And so, even from then, even though I didn't think that eventually I would have my own firm that dealt with career coaching, where I'm dealing with thousands of career paths, even at the very beginning, I was issuing timesheets. I was, organizing files for people searching for jobs. All those sorts of little steps in the way of getting people hired. And then from there, I moved into business consulting. So it wasn't so much hiring, but it was still working in business, working in an advisory capacity. So I use that today, and certainly knowing a lot about different industries helps me in my work. I then went into retained executive search, which of course is directly hiring people. I then went in-house in recruiting for a global media company before starting my own firm in 2008. And, fun fact is that I actually didn't major in anything HR related. I was a double major in economics and music. So I trained as a classical pianist, and I've been doing creative stuff all along the way. I've done acting and improv and stand-up comedy. So I have a unique career path too. So I encourage my clients to do the same.
It's really good. I'd like to get into some of these, so maybe later we might repeat some of them to get a timeline of your life. And you mentioned your first job in college, working in the career services section. What was your first job ever? Because I'm guessing with someone with what you do, that wasn't your very first job. It wasn't right out of college. Okay, here's the first. You were doing something
Well, it
as a
was my first.
teenager.
Yeah, it was my first office job for
Yeah.
sure. But when I was younger, when I
How
was
like
in
how
grade school, so when
yeah
I was
like
in
how
grade school,
young?
so
The youngest
I want
job
to
that you would have
say,
had.
oh yeah, for sure. By the time I was, 9 or 10, I was babysitting,
Yeah,
a
that's
small
good.
child in my building, right? So I was babysitting, but I was also, I think even before that, I was actually selling small candies at
Nice.
my to my elementary school classmates. I would buy candy in bulk that would come in little packages, little junior mints or
That's
little
awesome.
packs of gum, and I would sell them, because even at just pennies for each little pack, because you buy them 50 at a time, or what
Yeah,
I was making, dollars in profit, which for
that's
a young kid is a lot.
that's like my dear wife. I believe she did that with her sisters. She would go out and buy and then sell them to her sisters or something along. It just shows the drive, the entrepreneurial, the idea that there's something in it. So after selling candies, that's awesome. I think you're the youngest so far. Eight, what was it, 8, 9, maybe? How old were you in that
Yeah, yeah.
eight or
So
eight
I
or
was in
nine?
elementary school.
So 8 or 9, that's
When I was selling candy, I mean, it was 7, 8, 9, yes, and then babysitting, a little bit of tutoring. So I did have other kinds of jobs. I didn't work in an office though until
well, that's
I,
awesome. I'm not
yeah.
even like, it's interesting that you worked in an office and do those things, but I like to map out the career path of people to show how nonlinear it is, and how, someone's the beginnings of someone's idea of work, how that started, what the motivation was. Do you know why that kind of kindled at such an early age? Like, you're talking 7, 8, 9, 10. Like, that's impressive.
Yeah, it's funny because I don't think of myself necessarily as an entrepreneur, although I will say that my mom was side hustling before side hustling was a thing. I mean, she
Hmm.
routinely had her day job and then she would sell Avon products. She was an Avon lady. And then she would have a part-time job on the weekends sometimes. And so I think I always thought creatively about what a career might look like, that I didn't necessarily see, okay, you have to do this one thing
Hmm.
and that's all that there is. And I was also good in math, frankly, so I could just run the numbers on a bag of bulk junior mints and see that there was potential there.
What about middle school and into high school? Did you have some other job, try some other things?
That was mainly, I mean, it was mainly about school. I'll tell you that my upbringing was very much the traditional do well in school so that you can get into a good college, so that you can get a good job, and so you can work at this good job. As much as I say that my mom was the first side hustler, I don't think she ever referred to herself that way or thought of herself
Mhm.
as entrepreneurial. And I certainly didn't think of myself as entrepreneurial even when I started my own company in 2008. So we're talking 13 years ago. I was thinking of it as a reluctant entrepreneurship. I thought of
Mhm.
it as there were things that I wanted to do. I didn't see exactly the job that matched up. So I made myself a job. I didn't think of it as I went into business. Again, I was still thinking in terms of traditional career.
Caroline, knowing that you weren't really working in middle school, high school, but you were in the sense of in a job, but you were working hard in school. Can you give us an idea of what the push was? You mentioned to get a job, but I know my dear wife is Korean. There's different cultures that look at education differently. So while on the surface it seems like a no-brainer, of course, middle school, high school, you should be focusing on school and doing well and looking in for your career, but not all people do it. Not all people are motivated to actually put that pen or pencil to the paper. So where was that coming from, and what was the core idea, and why? Why was education a prominent? I mean, you went into economics and music, which means you probably started some instrument of some sort when you were a younger child as well. So where did that come from, and why do you think that is important?
Yeah, I think you touched on it when you say that some of this is cultural, right, and societal norms. So my mom was also a pianist. I feel like I can tell this joke because I myself am Asian. I'm Asian, so I had to pick up an instrument.
Mhm.
It was just expected that you pick up an instrument. Even my sister, who ultimately didn't continue with piano, learned how to play the piano. We all learned an instrument, and so it was initially leading by example. And like I said, my mom was working really hard. And so that was just something that seemed normal. So even though it wasn't about starting a business necessarily, it was all about, she did well when she was in school and here she is working really hard still. And so that was the role model, right, that I was following. And I also felt like it was a way of um, I think it's a lot of it's the immigrant mentality. My mom immigrated to the US from the Philippines. I was born here, but of course
Mhm.
I, saw again how she cobbled together a career here from scratch, basically. And
Yeah.
so my generation, so my sister and I were the first of her and her siblings, second generation to graduate from college here. And so there was just this notion of you have this great opportunity.
Yeah.
Higher education in the US is very It's prestigious. And rightly so. I mean, I felt like I had a great education. You might as well use it, take advantage of it, and um, don't let those opportunities go to waste. So I always just felt like, hey, here we are, and I'm seeing everyone around me working hard, and so it just made sense.
Caroline, can you comment also? You're also saying too, like taking advantage of an opportunity, a good opportunity, but not everyone's immigrating over. And that, that's like the nice storybook. My family came over and we saw this opportunity, and it's great, it's wonderful, but not all people have that story. And so, like, I'm thinking even of my son and my daughter, in getting them to sit down and do their work, especially nowadays with COVID, where a lot of it's home, so it's more of like homeschooling. And it's like, I have it in my mind, the idea of why school is important, but I also know it's good to get the advice of other people and their perspective, so we can impart that to other people, to children and other people, maybe even lifelong learners who are a little older, getting into education as well. So how would you present that message to someone that doesn't have some wonderful story or some adversity in their life, but it's just the idea of school's very important for you, even though it doesn't seem like the fruits of your labor are coming to fruition at this moment, and it's a grind. How would you present that message to a younger audience, or someone just realizing, I need to upgrade my skills?
Yeah, I have kids myself, so I understand your the analogy that you give. And I had read somewhere that third generation wealth is the hardest. That the first generation makes it, the second generation kind of lives off the fruits of that. But then
Thanks a
by the
lot,
time you get to
Mom.
the third generation, it's harder and harder. And part of it is because they lose that history, right? They lose how difficult it was perhaps to, in this case, amass that wealth, or in what we were talking about, that education, that opportunity.
Hmm.
So even just that story. So with my own kids, for example, it's less about me telling them you should take advantage of education specifically as an opportunity, but I do try to point out to them different options. And I have told them that statistic about third generation wealth, and just to open their eyes and say, isn't that interesting that it is difficult, right, to do
Yeah,
that?
yeah.
And just letting them also figure it out, right? Because I think part of taking advantage of opportunities is that there is a self-starting mentality, that you have to find something in yourself. In my case, I was modeling after my mom and seeing how hard she worked. For my kids, they're going to have to find whatever that other inspiration is.
Hmm.
And it might be modeling after what they
Mom.
hopefully what they see
Yeah,
with their parents,
yeah.
or it might be that they pursue something, they have an interest, or they develop a passion in something, and that is what pulls them along. So I think, when I talk to someone who maybe it's not education, or maybe it's not running their own business, or
Hmm.
maybe it's not getting to the C level, um, I'm not dismayed by that. I'm always like, well, then what is it for you
Hmm.
that lights you up? Because I do believe that. I think everybody wants to be on a path to something. I think we innately, want to be involved, want to leave a legacy. We might not say that or call it that, but
Hmm.
I think people enjoy being interested. And so there are many different ways to have a career. And I should know, I've recruited for over 20 years. I've coached hundreds of people. And so I do see that there are people who are passionate and who are accomplished, who are entrepreneurs, who are employees, who are executives, who are, creatives. And so there's many ways to skin this cat, as I say.
Well, thinking of, I mean, not only a cat, but a bird's eye view of your career, in the sense that you had a lot of different opportunities. Could you give us that view and bring us up till today of what you're doing? And just, I mean, some of the difficulties, some of the challenges of not maybe being where you want to be, but you can see some of these experiences were good to progress you forward, as well as, what those steps may have looked like in transitioning into what you do now.
Sure. And look, I'm telling my story with 2020 hindsight,
Yeah,
right? So I didn't live the story with the lessons already learned,
yeah,
right? When I
absolutely.
was making the choices that I made, it was really based on the knowledge that I had at the time and my priorities at the time. So in the beginning, when I majored in music and economics, so I made those choices based one on my interests, but two also on where I thought that I was going to have a career. At
Hmm.
the time, I was really looking at college as a stepping stone into my real adult life. I think, like many young people,
Hmm.
okay, life begins after college. And so economics was something that I found incredibly interesting, but also incredibly practical. And I felt like I could do something with that. And music was the reason why I double majored as opposed to maybe just taking classes or minoring was because I wanted to be in the conservatory program. I wanted to actually take private lessons, and you could not do that unless you were a major. So I had to suck it up and add a bunch of courses that I might not necessarily have taken. So again, I'm just
Caroline,
making.
just sorry to interrupt, but I mean that shows your foresight just to look ahead into something. And I would, for myself, who did not look in ahead in my even in school, and the idea of, well, how would these courses affect the future? Even something small, like I remember taking a guitar lesson or an art lesson, like how would that help me in the future? But you were really looking at, you wanted to continue your music on the side, however that would look professionally, but you were taking these courses and you thought of that before. And I think a lot of students are not taking their course selection as seriously. They might take the major, but you're doubling down because you have another plan. And I think it's really good on you to be wise enough at that young of age, and I guess anyone can be wise at any age, but the idea of what you did is really, it should be commended, because I know I didn't do it, and I don't know how many people are. There's a lot of people doing it, but I think it's really good what you did.
Well, I want to stress too that there could also be lots of other selections, right? So one could also have said, "Oh, well, I'm taking, let's say, economics in this case, and it's a pretty analytical subject. Let me double it with something like English,
Hmm.
that
Balance it
that
out for you.
exercises
Yeah.
different muscles. Let me double it with politics if I'm interested, perhaps in looking at more of the macro and more of society. So I think when I tell, like I said, I tell the story because I know how the story played out. But as I'm going through it, and this is something that I encourage with everybody, is that you don't have to have it all figured out. I chose to major in music so that I could take the lessons because I wanted the lessons.
Yeah.
And I didn't necessarily have, certainly there was no guarantee that anything would come of it.
Mhm.
I just felt like it was something I wanted to continue doing. And as it turned out, my piano teacher, was very interested in the stock market. And so we would spend a lot of my lesson time talking about the things that I was learning in economics, and we started
Yeah.
talking about business. And so you don't really know where your inspirations are going to come from, where your opportunities are going to come from, but you can't really lose if you pursue things that are interesting to you, because then you're going to have the natural motivation to want to continue. If I didn't want to go to the lessons, if I was there kicking and screaming, who knows if I would have developed as good a rapport with my teacher that he and I started talking about subjects that were well outside the bounds of our work together.
Going back just a little bit, just to wonder, did you kick and scream doing your maths when at first, or your music at first when you first started getting into it, or were you all? I mean, at 7 and 8, you were doubling
Yeah,
down
no,
your
and I was
money.
lucky. I was lucky that way, obviously, that I took to it and that I enjoyed it.
Mhm.
Um, I can tell you that I would have. We're not a sporty family. There are no athletes in the family, and so I think you could tell this story if you had an athletic family. There are some families I know where everybody plays little league or everybody learns how to play tennis or whatever it is, and so you have that similar dynamic. I wish that I had learned certain sports when I was younger and that I just was more coordinated and that way when it was early on. And so I feel like, if people are listening and they're like, oh, I didn't have the kind of upbringing where I had music, it's not about music. And if you didn't have
Mhm.
an upbringing where you had sports, it's also not about the sport, right? It's about kind of where are you in the moment and what can you do with now?
Mhm.
Because that's really all that we have. So even when I talk about planning to take lessons and planning for the major, that again, that was dictated by what was happening then, which was
Mhm.
I was required to take to declare the major in order to continue the lessons. And so that's what I did. And I think that everybody should be looking at that. We're in the middle of a pandemic. And so some industries are struggling, some career paths are struggling. Um, so has a door shut in one direction, but surely a door has opened in another direction because there are some industries and career paths that are thriving, right?
So,
So
so Caroline, as you bumped along and changed, not really sure exactly as you were going through it, but with your hindsight now, how did you transition into your career that your present position in the company you have?
yeah, so I pursued my interest. I definitely paid attention to that. I
Mhm.
also looked at opportunities and what the market will bear, right, with those interests. And so I I was interested in career. That first job in career services at university,
Mhm.
it was because selfishly enough, I wanted to learn good job search technique. I wanted to be in the office when the jobs were getting posted. I wanted to see
That's so smart.
how
Why
people
why didn't
walk
I
through the
think of that? That's like
So my
you're right.
first job, I was a first year in college,
Yeah.
and I was a gopher for the employers that were interviewing the seniors that were graduating into
Nice.
full-time jobs. And so my job was just to sit outside the interview room and sign people in. So when the next kid, and then to knock on the door when it was, 25 minutes to, yeah, of course. And so of course I was listening. Not only was I listening, but when the employer would come out
Yeah.
for a break or
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I would ask them,
Yeah.
so who did well and what did you like? And, where can we improve?
Wow.
And it was, and of course I shared that information with the school. So I
Mhm.
went right back to my boss and I let her know, you know, what was good about kind of the students that came.
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily out someone, but I would say, oh, it looks like people didn't really do their research here, and so I would pick up certain tips and techniques. And so by the time I became a senior, and that was me in the interview room, oh, I had all sorts of tips.
You were good. You were interviewing them. You were ready for
Yes.
that. So you moved on, you moved into your own career, and then I don't want to take up too much of your time, and I think the career that you've had, the things that you jumped into, you were a banker, you were a recruiter, you were a number of other things, but when was it in your career that you felt you wanted to branch out for yourself? Or did you even feel like you were doing something for yourself while working in these positions?
Yeah, yeah. So I call myself the reluctant entrepreneur. And again, I say that as an encouragement to people who are out there who think of starting their own business as a risky proposition, too
Mhm.
risky for me. Like I'm not going to do something like that. Well, I don't think of myself as a particularly, risk lover, or a very risky person. I think of myself as a very planned, risk averse person. But for me, I was pursuing my interests. I was pursuing different careers. And I really enjoyed, there were two things that I really enjoyed, which were the recruiting aspect. I love all things career. I love interviewing people. I love meeting people. But I also loved advising work. I loved coaching people on their careers. I loved teaching. I was an adjunct at the time for university. I'm still there 20 years and counting at Columbia University, teaching professional development. And I enjoyed that aspect of it. And I didn't want to have to choose. And I also felt like knowing what I know about business, and as much as I think companies talk about HR and how important the people function is to the business, at the end of the day, it's not making money for the company. It's not like sales, where you're bringing in dollars for the company, unless you are running a recruiting agency or running a coaching firm. And so that's what I had to do. And since there isn't a combined recruiting and coaching firm that I could see, I made my own. So for me, I thought of it as, I want to make my dream job. I didn't see it anywhere. And so let me put these projects together and essentially create that dream job for myself.
So what is the name of your company that you have now, and how does that help you
Yeah,
people searching for a
absolutely.
job
So
and employers?
yeah, so I have gone through a number of different incarnations. When I started the company in 2008, I had a business partner who has since retired. And so when we branded the company initially, it was called Six Figure Start. That
Yes.
website is actually still out there. And the thinking behind that was because we both had worked in campus recruiting as well as experienced recruiting. And so the idea was to get people out of the gate onto that six-figure career path, since Six-Figure Start. When
Mhm.
she retired, and officially it was this year, I have since rebranded just under my name, Ceniza-Levine.com, and I created actually a program called the Dream Career Club. So you can also find me there, dreamcareerclub.com. And it's exactly what it sounds like, where I really believe that there is a dream career for everybody. And as I said in the beginning, it's not about employee versus entrepreneur, or that you have to
Caroline,
be an executive.
do you think that would have worked? I mean, I can just looking at the difference in names to 2008 six-figure start. Like that seems bold and like a good name, marketing wise, brand wise, to
Mhm.
the Dream Career Club. And that seems appropriate now. Do you think
Yeah.
the Dream Career Club would have worked in the sense of the name and the branding, or was it that was the time and that was appropriate six figure? Do you think that
Yeah,
was
I think both of them would have worked,
would have been
honestly.
well?
And I
Yeah.
think that, and this is another lesson I feel like for folks, where I think that people are so, and of course there'll be branding agencies who will tell you it's all about the name, it's all about the logo, it's all
Yeah.
about the tagline, it's all about the
Mm-hmm.
headline. But at the end of the day, it's all about a lot of things,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think both things can work. And I know some coaches and I know some recruiters who very successfully brand just with their name, without a tagline or without an outside name. I know people who brand very effectively without a specific website presence. And then I also know people who create multiple strong
Mm-hmm.
brands.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so I think it's less about what the name is and more just about, hey, can people find me?
Yeah.
And can people get a sense of who I am? And this is why I love doing podcasts and why I do so much work with the media, is because I feel like this is the way that you get your message out, whatever it's called.
So, Caroline, what is the process? So, if a college student or whomever your demographic is comes to you in search of a job, they want to be part of the club, what's the process there? What do you bring them through?
Yeah, so I have a 6-step job search process. And if it's someone who's going through a career change, where career change is I define as where you're looking for a job that's outside what you've normally done. So you're either changing your role, let's say from sales to marketing or marketing to finance, or you're changing your industry. You used to be in financial services and now you're moving into media or into retail, or it's both. You're changing your role and your industry. So career change is different than job search, because yes, you're trying to get hired, or you're trying to start a business, but you're doing something you haven't done before. And so it's much more disruptive to your life. It's a process that typically takes longer. So when I talk about creating that dream career, if it's something that's different, there are a few extra steps. But generally speaking, I take people through a systematic process, specifically because I think people here go out and get a job and it's like, what, how exactly do I do that? And so we
Mm,
start with identifying what that area of interest is. And then it goes into creating the marketing material behind that. And for an employee or for a job seeker, that means your resume, your cover letter, your online profile, which for most people is LinkedIn almost exclusively.
mhm,
The way that you talk about yourself, that's marketing too, how you introduce yourself. And then there's, of course, the research, the work around what companies are in this area that you say that you're interested in, what types of roles, what level would make sense for you. There's that. Then, of course, there's actually meeting the people and interviewing with the people. Then there's troubleshooting, because you don't just move from step to step to step. Invariably, things go wrong. You apply for a job, you never hear back. You go for a meeting, nothing happens from that meeting. You go far along a process, maybe you don't get the offer. You come in second place or third place, or you don't
mhm,
even know how you
mhm.
placed. You just don't get the offer, right? And so troubleshooting is a step in the process. And then finally, there's, of course, negotiating and closing that offer. Because as much as we like to think it's as simple as dropping a resume, having a conversation, and then the perfect offer shows up, no, you multiple interviews, you've got to negotiate that offer, make sure it's at the right compensation, at the right title, at the right level, that you have the right support, et cetera, et cetera. So there are multiple steps, and we work through all of them depending on where the person is. And like I said, if it's a career change, there might be some pre-steps there to really play around with what that area of interest is and to set up their life so that they can absorb whatever the new career is going to mean for the rest of their life.
So you do the career change, but you're also dealing with people getting into work as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think really they go hand in hand. I
Yep.
think if you're thinking about a career change, I think what really stymies a lot of people is, okay, I get it. I'm not happy where I am. I want to find something better, but what does better mean
Mhm,
exactly? How do I actually translate? I want to work in a collaborative, fast-paced environment where I'm dealing with people. What does that mean from an industry perspective or from a role perspective? How do I translate that? And that's where I come in, because I have been a recruiter and I've seen thousands of jobs and I've hired from thousands of candidates and seen many, many different profiles. And so, I have that advantage of seeing, a multiple times what an individual person has seen in their career, because of course they're just managing themselves.
Caroline, the reason I have this podcast is to show the skills and talents of people because I'm in amazement of the talents that people have and the jobs they're able to do and what they're able to produce or how they serve. And I think almost in one way, although you would do it much better than I would, or maybe even have a greater appreciation. But can you comment on the appreciation you have for the skills and talents of people that you've seen and the thousands of interviews you've done and all the research that you're doing? Because to me, I look back and it's like people are their own individual artists, right? They have all these wonderful skills that I do not have, that I lack. And I stand in awe of what people are able to accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of the career paths that I've seen, I break it down by industry. So I've
Mhm.
had the privilege of working with people in the financial sector, in creative sectors like media and entertainment, in retail and fashion, in pharma, biotech, especially in this era with the race to the vaccine. So many different types of industries, nonprofit,
Mhm.
education. I've never worked in the government or recruited for the government. So that's what the public sector is one place where I just haven't been involved. But otherwise, I've touched so many different industries. And it's so interesting to be at the in the audience, like just watching people talk
Mhm.
about their industries, what innovations are happening, what are the trends that are happening, how the business works. I find that super interesting. And then for the individual, what are they contributing? So that's their role. I've worked with sales people and marketing people, financial people, operations people, creatives, like editorial or graphics, engineers and technical people. And again, those, watching those skills unfold, and they might be people skills, ways of relating, might be communication skills, whether it's writing or, um, public speaking, something like that. It could be a technical skill, and that could be, a software, or it can be financial analysis or something, quantifiable that way. And so just watching what people bring to the table. And what I find so interesting is that people, you talk about people are individual artists. I thought you were going to say people are their own individual worst enemy. I have a lot of very, very talented professionals who don't see all of the talents, who don't break
Mhm.
down their own background in that way and see that their career path, which again, because people kind of walk through it a little bit opportunistically, they make the best
Mhm.
decisions they can at the time.
Mhm.
They don't necessarily think about all of the interesting experiences and wins that they collect along the way. And so that's another thing that I help people with, is to really eyes wide open, see that there are so many interesting and juicy aspects of their background that they should mine for future opportunities.
Well, Caroline, that's actually a question that I had that I introduced in the beginning is where do you think we should be putting our hope in the sense of our career? Is it how the markets ebb and flow and you listen to someone saying, well, there's this much of unemployment, this is the unemployment rate, or should we be looking to ourselves and as an artist or however we look at ourselves and to develop our skills and to be ready at all times? Because I find we're drawn through media or the news to look at what the news is telling us about what's out there for an opportunity versus there are people that will encourage you and tell you to build your skills, but I find that the temptation is to draw yourself away from yourself rather than looking to yourself and seeing what you have to offer to an employer.
Well, it's a combination of both. And call it playing offense and defense. And so offense is you're going after something. So you're looking at your interests, you're looking at what's going to light you up, and you have ideas on the industries and the roles that you would be interested in.
Hmm.
Defense is about the market. It's about responding to what the external conditions are.
Hmm.
So we are in the midst of a pandemic. The hospitality industry is just brutal right now.
Devastated, yeah.
That being said, I had a client who was 100% hospitality industry, and she was looking to make a career change and to change her role from operations into learning and development. And when you want to change your role, all things being equal, you want to stay in your industry if you can, because at least there's something that stays constant. You have a
Yeah.
body of expertise and you have a network that you can tap into. Well, her industry was decimated. She finally made that career change, and her employer shut down entirely. So this was, I mean, it wasn't that she was laid off,
Hmm.
it was the entire company closed down. And yet here she is, a few months later, and she got herself another job and completed that career change in that industry that is supposedly decimated by, in this case, the pandemic. And so in up and in down markets, companies are always hiring, at least some companies. And
Hmm.
so you have to find those companies. If you want something badly enough, you will find it. And so,
Yeah.
it's a combination of being realistic and responding to market conditions, but it's also sticking to what you're interested in and playing that offense and really going after things. And I can't say that one is more important than the other,
Hmm.
um, because I really think it's about the individual person and kind of where their circumstances are. With my client, she had the luxury of spending several months on her search, whether it was because she got a good enough severance package or she had savings in the bank or whatever it is. I've also worked with clients where they don't have that luxury and speed is of the utmost. And in that case, I tell people to look at what the growth markets are, to look more defensively, to say what are the external conditions, because at that point you're playing probabilities. So it really, really depends.
Yeah, I do like how you said being ready. Would you say the same thing as well if someone versus finding a job in their interests versus needing a job to pay the bills?
Well, everyone that I work with in some way, shape, or form needs the job to pay the bills,
Mm-hmm.
right? I don't tend to work with people who are financially independent in the sense of like a
Mm-hmm.
trust fund baby, or just someone, at retirement looking for their legacy career. That being said, so going back to that example of the person trying to make a career change, but she had her 3 months to
Mm-hmm.
invest in it. So she's not looking at, oh my gosh, I can't pay rent by next month. She's not financially independent. So there's a timeline, but there's at least a long enough timeline that she can invest some time into thinking about what's best for her. And I would argue that most people are in her boat, that most people are
Yeah.
not going to be, at least most people who are looking to get a career coach, right, who are
Mm-hmm.
investing in that kind of training and in that kind of program. They're at the stage in their career where they're not going to be homeless by next week if they don't get a job, that they do have some runway. I think what happens is that people think they can do it on their own, or they waste a lot of time, honestly, kind of running around and trying the easy stuff, maybe submitting their resume for a bunch of things, or talking to people that they know. They don't really have a strategy at the outset, and then they're 1, 2, or 3 months in, they're stuck, they haven't been working, and then they're like, oh my goodness, I have to get a job tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Versus taking that step back in the beginning and say, okay, I'm going to do this right from the beginning, and I'm going to give myself the full amount of time to invest.
Do you find, Caroline, that there's people who are not following some logical steps to finding a job, and then they're getting near the end discouraged, maybe even depressed, and feeling like they can't get a job, but the reality is they didn't follow a process like that you have set up, or some logical way of doing it, and they're just going about it the wrong way, and it seems like they're burning more energy than they're getting in return?
Yeah, I think it's less about logic, because I do think that people feel like they're doing the best that they can. I mean, maybe that's me being optimistic about people, but I do
Mhm.
feel like people make the best decisions that they can at the time.
Yeah.
And they might have not looked for a job in a long time. And maybe the last time they got a job, it was through submitting a resume and someone called them and it happened to work out. And in fact, I work with a lot of people who are mid-career.
Mm.
These are experienced folks. They're ambitious. They have a good network, and they're smart. So these aren't folks who don't lack, who lack common sense, right? They're
Yeah.
smart, ambitious people.
Yeah.
But what it is that in the beginning of your career, the world is your oyster. You can almost stumble into a job because you're coming fresh out of university, let's say. Everyone's dying to hire you. And it's when you get mid-career, when you have 5, 10, 15, 20 years under your belt, well, this is when you're potentially pigeonholed into a specific industry. Or maybe people will look at your background and say, wow, with 10 years of experience, I would have expected this person to know more about XYZ, or to be at a
Mm.
higher title. And all of a sudden, the bar is higher, of course, because you have more experience. And I think people might not be ready for that kind of a competitive search. And then also, if you haven't looked for a job in a long time, you're not ready for today's job market. I'm
Yeah.
in the job market all the time. I'm either hiring people or I'm helping them get hired by coaching them. So I'm seeing a lot of different job searches, not just one, right? Not just your own job search. And so I'm seeing the trends that are happening in hiring. And I have to remind even my smart, talented professionals, I have to remind them that you're not just competing with other job seekers, you're competing with freelancers or consultants that are pitching for the work. You're competing with automation that might get rid of that job entirely. You're competing with internal people at the company who might just move right in there, and then all of a sudden there is no job opening. So this isn't yesterday's job search, right? This is what's happening now
Mhm.
based on the tools, the hiring tools and processes that are in the market right now, based on the economic conditions that are right now. So this post-pandemic, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that people don't necessarily take all those things into consideration because why would they be thinking about that? They're busy doing their job and living their life.
How
I'm thinking about that.
Caroline, how optimistic are you about being in the midst of work, in the hiring and helping aspect of it? How optimistic are you for people who really want to find a job? Whatever it is, wherever their interests take them, how optimistic are you?
Again, it depends on your runway, right? And so I'm optimistic for the person who has time to invest. I will tell you that in general, in a down market, and I call the market we're in a down market because there's been an amazing external shock to the system, right? And companies are suffering and the economy is suffering. And when that happens, companies are gun shy about hiring. They get a little bit scared about making that investment. Gosh, if I hire someone and I make that commitment, then what? So hiring is slower in this type of a market. It happens, but it's in general, it's slower. And so I'm optimistic for the person who goes in eyes wide open and says, okay, I know it might take a little bit longer, but I'm okay. I'm not going to be homeless next week. I know, where I have some savings or I have my severance or I'm in it to work really hard and I'm going to do the things that I have to do, the research, the marketing, the talking to people, the interview technique, et cetera, et cetera. I'm very optimistic for those folks. I think today is an amazing time to be designing your dream career because there are so many different options open to you right now.
Caroline, thinking of you selling candy or getting into babysitting, and working hard as a student, as well as for these people you're dealing with primarily of changing a career, is there some advice that you have, even something that is not of their interest as a kid, but I guess for you selling candy was, but whether it's selling lemonade or working at McDonald's or something, whatever their motivation is to work, is there advice that you have for people just getting into or changing their career?
Yes, I think the first thing is to believe that it can happen. If you can't sell yourself on your ability to change careers, you won't be very convincing talking to anybody else. So,
Why do you think some people are hesitant? And then I know nerves kind of get in the way, lack of confidence. Why are people maybe hesitant to believe that they can land this job or get a career going?
well, I think that sometimes people, especially by the time that they come to see me, typically, they've tried to do things themselves. So they've been around the block. Maybe they've been knocked around a bit.
Yeah.
They've gotten rejected from jobs.
Which is
And
common, right?
yeah,
I
which
mean,
is
so for
common.
people listening, it's common. So if you're getting knocked around, someone else probably got knocked around as well, and many more.
Exactly. And especially if you haven't gone on the market in a while and maybe you have an outdated resume or a resume or you're talking about yourself in a way that isn't ideal because it's not for today's job market or it's not addressing the things that are relevant to your new career. You asked me about career change specifically.
Yep.
And so the thing that I would say is you're talking about a new career and you have to be talking to a new audience, a new market, a new set of companies, a new set of decision makers. And many times people are stuck in their old career. They're proud of their old career, which is fabulous. And they talk about everything that they've accomplished kind of in that old career with those old buzzwords and the jargon that's meaningful to people in their old career. But if you want a new career, if you're entering a new area, like you have to be all in into that area. I'm not going to be talking to a financial services person the same way that I talk to a media person, the same way that I talk to a nonprofit person. Shame on me if I do that. That's my issue, right? So you as the person who wants a career change, it's like if you're going from financial services to media to nonprofit to fill in the blank, you have to talk their language. It's not about them, understanding you. It's about you relating to them.
Thinking of that, I studied, and this is by no means did I do very well or remember, but studied, say, Greek or Hebrew. And while I studied it, I didn't really put it into practice. Now, thinking of someone going from one career to another, they need to learn this language. And is there a way for it not to be phony, or you're kind of pressing it when it's not something that you're really used to in an interview, or as you start going in this process of a new career? Is there a way to kind of get yourself familiar with the jargon, the language, so that you're more attuned to what they're looking for?
Well, I think you had the great analogy of learning Greek. Let's say, I know you're probably thinking about it's all Greek to me, and that's why Greek came out. But learning a language, whether it's Greek, French, Chinese, or fill in the blank, there's no substitute for speaking the language, right? For throwing yourself into it, and it's the listener that you're conversing with
Hmm.
who's going to decide whether you really speak Greek, French, Chinese, or fill in the blank. And
Hmm.
similarly, in a career change, there's no substitute for throwing yourself into it. And so, to give you an example, let's say financial services. So let's take an industry change. You're going
Hmm.
from financial services to media. Do you know the companies that are the top companies in the sector that you're looking at, specifically in media? Do you know what's happening in that industry? Um, what keeps media CEOs up at night? What exactly they're hiring for? What some of the big initiatives are? That is speaking Greek to a Greek person or Chinese to a Chinese person. You're speaking media to the media people. Let's take a role example. You are a finance person and you want to move into marketing, and you say, trust me, I know marketing. Well, have you volunteered for your local community organization to organize an event for them, to do their social media marketing, to help them with a direct mail campaign, to do marketing for your son or daughter's preschool or high school, or fill in the blank? There are so many ways to actually do marketing, so that you're not telling people, sure, I speak Greek. You're just speaking to them in
Yeah.
Greek.
Yeah.
And then they realize, oh my goodness, your Greek is pretty good, right?
Hmm.
You might
I
not be
agree.
fluent, but if you can carry on a conversation, they might say, okay, I'm going to continue with this conversation with you. And in talking to me, you're going to learn more Greek, and you've done a little marketing. I'm going to bring you on. And in working with me, you're going to improve your marketing. That's how it works.
Caroline, and that's great. Caroline, as I said, I'm over here with a life jacket on, treading water as I speak to you. So I'm amazed by what it is you're doing. How do you stay so productive? What keeps you going?
Yeah. So I love what I do. That definitely helps. And I know that I hearken back all the time to pursue your interests. Like I said, I don't do that in a vacuum. I'm also looking at market conditions. I also play defense and invest my money well and all of that. I take care of myself. But I do think it helps a lot that I just love careers. And so I stay up on my industry. So I talk to other recruiters, I talk to
Mm.
other coaches. I am naturally curious about what's happening in my space, which is the career space, so that I can see around corners and I can see how things have changed, and I can create services and products that respond to the hiring market, the job search market right now, and not in 2008 even when I
Hmm.
got started. So that definitely helps me, the fact that I'm just naturally interested. And then practically speaking, I set goals for myself. I monitor my time. I keep a time diary, much like people would keep a food diary or a spending diary. And so I know if I'm spending time on this recruiting project or this coaching client, or how much marketing I'm doing by guesting on a podcast like this one, or by writing a career advice piece, or by doing a talk. So I'm tracking all of these things, and I'm troubleshooting just like I tell my career clients to troubleshoot. I'll look and I'll see, did anything come of this? Should I be doing more of this? Should I be doing less of this? Is there something that I should start doing that I'm not doing?
How do
That's how I
you
keep.
how do you keep those work life choices in check? So how do you turn off your work and I mean, you probably schedule it, but what is it that you do so you know that, okay, I'm done work. I got to put this aside and get some, not balance, but something else, some spice in there.
Yeah, for sure. I do what works for me, which is it's interesting. I try a lot of different things. I love to read about productivity, about different hacks, if you will, because I always feel like I'm going to learn something, and I try different things. I read about other entrepreneurs and how they manage to put boundaries between their business and their life. For me, counterintuitively, I don't necessarily recommend it to people. I prefer doing a little bit almost every day than putting all of my work into, let's say, a Monday to Friday or a Monday to Thursday. I will do a lot of my writing on Saturday and Sunday. Instead of taking, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
the whole weekend off,
Mm-hmm.
I'll do a lot of my meetings late in the day. Um, I do a lot of personal things early in the morning when I know that some people are saying, "Oh, right away, I'm going to start with my work day." That's the that's the time where I like to sometimes just sit with my journal. I like to do my meditation early in the morning. And so I have found what works for me. And that's what I tell my clients. I tell my clients that you do have to take time to rest and refresh. I'm never going to tell you when that time is going to be. If it's a few hours, scattered throughout the week, or if it's one full day, you need that one full day, more power to you, whatever it is. Experiment if you're not sure. Do something for a couple of weeks, see how you feel. Do something else for a couple of weeks, see how you feel. But don't be afraid to change it up if it's not working. And don't feel like just because, this worked for someone else, or for a
Mm.
lot of people even, that
It
it's going
has
to
to
work
work
for
for
you.
you.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is a good question. I ask people this, but I'd like your input on the idea of character in career. So, as a career coach, do you speak to your clients about their character, or do you just let them do what they want in the career that they choose?
I certainly give advice around, based on what they're telling me, their values and interests and priorities are. I will tell them, have you considered this functional area? Have you considered this industry? Have you thought of this size of company? I'll say, you strike me as someone who would be happier in a startup environment versus in a big established company.
Mm.
Now, I had a client recently who was interested exclusively in big established companies. And I said to her, I think you would actually be amazing in a funded startup that is fast growing, just based on your talents and based on the environment that you say that you want. You're not
Mhm.
describing a big established company. She disagreed. It's her career.
Yeah.
She's going to be the one that lives it. And so that is not my call to make. That being said, she had a mentor. I mean, she has a mentor. So different from a coach, right? This is someone who is advising her on the side, and they have this, kind of personal relationship. And that mentor had the same feedback. And she came back to me and she said, my mentor said almost the identical thing that you said. And it planted a seed. She's still going after the big company, and my work with her was to get her ready for that type of a job search, because how you present yourself, obviously the research that you do, the company set is different, the decision makers are different, what they're going to be looking for is different. And so we were working towards that type of job search because that's her decision. But certainly I will let my opinions be known. And I'll also tell people when I see a range of options, and I'll
Mhm.
say, okay, let's pursue this for now, but keep in mind that here's 2, 3, or 4, plan B, C, and D. And these are some things that we might want to revisit as you go along.
You're a coach, right? You're a career coach, and I know you're not into sports or you didn't play sports growing up, but do you have like a wins-loss percentage going on of where you directed people in the right way versus they didn't listen to me, and then they eventually churned, or you were just wrong in some advice, not in the sense that it was completely wrong, but just what you felt was better for them? Do you have some little thing going in the back
Yeah,
of your
yeah, yeah.
mind?
So the thing is that people come to me at different stages.
Yes.
So, defining win and loss, it's not going to be the same for everyone. But
Hmm.
I'll tell you, just highlight some of the big wins are when, I've had multiple clients this year who have changed careers, who have made more money in doing so. So it's a big myth that just because you start something new that you have to take a step
Started at the
back.
bottom, yeah.
And in fact, I had a client who, and this is not a typo, 72% raise, switching industries. It makes sense in this story because she was going from a lower paying industry on average to a
Hmm.
higher paying industry. They wanted her skill set, and we really she worked very hard, and she really listened and owned kind of the marketing and the rebranding that I was telling her to do. And so that enabled her to really sell her skills so that the industry jump to them was inconsequential, and they felt like they were getting an expert on the skill side, and they paid her accordingly. So I consider those some big wins.
Yeah.
I've had clients where, and there was a client that I dealt with this year, someone I had worked with a few years ago, and she came to me and said that she wanted a career change, or wanted to make a big move, and I kind of put her through those paces, the things that I just listed here in
Hmm.
terms of identifying a target and the marketing and the research. And she went most of the way through, but when it came time to really start moving her network and people that she was talking to job openings, and it's not necessarily easy. You're doing a lot of this work, and sometimes it doesn't happen right away. And she didn't want to continue. She got a job offer that was kind of right in her comfort zone,
Hmm.
and she felt like that was what she wanted to do rather than hold out for something. She relied on defense rather than offense, and that's fine,
Hmm.
except that her industry was under siege, and it's still under siege. And now we're 3 years after, and she's in that boat. And she actually came back to me to work in one of my programs, to work with me again, and I referred her to someone else just because
Hmm.
I felt like I wanted her to have a different perspective.
Yeah.
I felt like I didn't get through to her the
Yeah.
first time. And so I did feel like that wouldn't have been a productive relationship there. I think that people need to get the support that they need. And so sometimes, sometimes you can't bring people to the reality that you think is so obvious to you. It's, they're not ready for it.
I think I have no doubt that you have a lot of successes under your belt, and it's quite interesting, and I'm sure you have a lot of stories. And I also know that you're under a time restraint, so I only have a couple of questions, and I would really like to stretch out this longer, but I know time is eluding us. You mentioned a goal. Do you have an overarching goal for your company or what it is you're doing in work?
Well, I designed my company to be a lifestyle company, in the sense that I didn't design it to exit, to sell it potentially to a bigger company, um, to pass it on to my kids. So I really designed it to include all of the things that I enjoy doing, to pay me what I want to earn so that I can live the life that I want to live. And so that's what I've been working towards all these years. And so it's a moving target in the sense that my interests have also changed over time. And so I change up what it is that I like to do. So that's still a work in progress. I think it's going to be a work in progress until I decide I somehow want to express my interests in a different way outside this business. Um, so that's really the metric that I
Hmm.
it's like, do I still love what I do? Would I do it if I didn't need the money? Then I know that I'm on the right track. But at the same time, because I'm an economist at heart, perhaps, or my first job was business consulting, right? I do want to have a thriving business that's growing. I want it to be challenging. I want it to not to be all consuming, so that I have enough of a profit margin coming in that I feel like I can take vacations and I can take time off, that it's not just me.
Adversely, is there any adversity that you have faced that either helps or hinders your work? But thinking in terms of people who are now facing or have faced adversity in their life, to offer them some advice?
Oh, for sure. I mean, let's just start with the pandemic again. I had work that was out and out canceled. I help people with their jobs and their careers, and on the one hand, yeah, people are more concerned about their jobs and careers, but they're also really concerned about spending money and about making risky moves as they perceive it, career change. And that's my expertise, is around going after that dream career. And so this market has some challenges for me. So when you talk about adversity, I mean, it's like, wow, do you mean today or just this week, or do you mean this quarter? I mean, things are always happening. So certainly the pandemic changes business, and it changes how everybody has to do business and how everybody has to look for a job. And so you ignore market conditions to your detriment. I always think that you have to look at what's going on around you. Um, I'm married. I have a family. I have outside interests, and so I'm always juggling, what's going on there. And so again, with the pandemic, school shut down, and just having to have everybody squeezing into a home now becomes a co-working space. I mean, everyone's home is a co-working space. And so it's just juggling that, making sure that there's enough Wi-Fi. I mean, so there are all sorts of adversity. I don't have anything so dramatic as, let's say, a medical illness or a personal crisis. I do have clients who have gone through that. And I will tell you that I'm pretty frank with them, that I'm of the opinion that sometimes the conditions aren't right to do a major career overhaul or a career investment. I once had a client who came to me who wanted to do a career change, was also dealing with elderly parents, with some other family medical issues. And this was transatlantic, because he was here in the US, his parents were in Europe, and it just wasn't the right time. And that's what I said to him. I said, the market will be there when you deal with these, when you move your parents into, that he was moving them into another residence, and just all sorts of things that he was juggling. And so we paused it for a good 6 months. But then when he came back, he was even more committed. And he realized, he was like, yes, you're right. And so, sometimes things happen, and you just have to, again, do the best you can in terms of making the best decision for right now. That could be making a big career move. That could be working your career at the margins, maybe just doing research while you're managing some of your other life stuff, whatever it is.
Caroline, how can people reach you? I know you're the author of Jump Ship, 10 Steps to Starting a New Career. You may want to plug that a little bit, but how can people find you and maybe even connect with you about the Dream Career Club?
Yeah, absolutely. If you just go to dreamcareerclub.com, that will get you right on the page that talks about the club, but then it also gets you into my broader site. I have dozens of articles on there which deal with career. On the coaching page, there is a replay of a webinar that I led called Land a Job You Love, which outlines that 9-step process that I talk about. So it talks about the 6 steps of actual job search, plus kind of those pre-steps I talked about when you are looking to change careers. And so, that's a free resource for stuff. And then right on the homepage is a downloadable checklist called the 25 career mistakes even smart professionals make. Because I find that, again, even smart, talented, ambitious folks, they sometimes run their career on autopilot, and they don't step back and work on their career and not just in their day-to-day job. And so the first step of having a dream career is really asking yourself, is that what I have now? Or is there some improvement that I need to make? Doesn't mean you quit your job, but is there some improvement that I need to make that will get me to that dream career?
You offer a lot of wisdom and great advice. Caroline, I have one final question for you, and that
Sure.
is, why do you work?
Well, for me, my career has been the stepping stone into an amazing life. I feel like I split my time among New York, where I was born and raised and lived for the first half of my life. And I have since taken up residence in Northeast Florida because I love the beach and I love to
Hmm.
be here. And I also have a vacation property in Tamarindo, Costa Rica. And so I can kind of move around when borders are open, but
Yeah.
I can move around and live in different places and do the things that I love. And so for me, I feel like I never envisioned that when I was a small kid selling junior mints for little profits. But now I can do that because I built this dream career for myself that gives me what I want and pays me very well for it. And that's what I want for everybody. It's like
Hmm.
we spend so much time working, Brian. I mean, let's face it. 40 hours, 50, 60 hours. So you might as well do it with something
Enjoy
that
it.
you love.
Caroline Ceniza-Levine, author, contributor to Forbes Careers, as well as career coach and the owner of the Dream Career Club. I thank you for your time, young lady, and I appreciate the work that you do.
Thanks so much, Brian.